Everyone in the city knew Victor Hale long before they ever saw his face. His reputation moved faster than he did, slipping into conversations like a warning. People lowered their voices when his name came up, as if he could hear them through walls. He was the kind of millionaire who didn't need to shout to be obeyed, his money did the talking for him. Businesses bent their rules when he entered, officials returned his calls instantly, and enemies somehow disappeared from the spotlight. Victor had learned early that fear was more reliable than respect, and he had spent decades perfecting it. The restaurant on King Street was one of his preferred arenas. It was elegant without being warm, expensive without being welcoming, a place designed to make people feel smaller the moment they walked in. Victor liked that. The staff knew his habits by heart. He complained before tasting, criticized before listening, and smiled only when someone looked uncomfortable. Managers treated his reservations like emergency drills. Waiters dreaded his arrival, not because he tipped poorly, but because he demanded humiliation as part of the service. On a gray, rain-soaked evening, the restaurant welcomed a new waitress. Her name was Elena. It was her first shift, and she moved with quiet focus, absorbing instructions, memorizing table numbers, listening more than she spoke. She wasn't nervous in the usual way. There was no shaking in her hands, no forced cheer in her voice. Instead, she carried herself with a calm that came from having faced harder things than an angry customer. She needed this job, yes, but she hadn't left her spine at the door. Other servers noticed her almost immediately, mostly because she didn't complain. One of them pulled her aside near the drink station and spoke in a whisper that carried fear more than sound. If a man named Victor Hale came in, she was told, she should agree with everything he said, apologize even when she hadn't done anything wrong, and never, ever talk back. Elena listened, nodded once, and thanked her. There was no promise in her eyes, only understanding. Later that night, the door opened and the mood shifted instantly. Victor Hale stepped inside, rain clinging to his coat like an extension of his impatience. The manager stiffened, already rehearsing apologies. Victor didn't bother looking around. He expected the room to rearrange itself for him, and it did. A table was cleared, chairs adjusted, menus replaced. He sat alone, as always, radiating irritation. By chance, or perhaps by the quiet indifference of fate, Elena was assigned to his table. The manager hesitated, then allowed it, too overwhelmed to intervene. Elena approached with a notepad and an even expression, unaware that everyone around her was holding their breath. She greeted Victor politely, not warmly, not fearfully, just professionally. He looked up, unimpressed, already searching for weakness. He didn't find it, and that, more than anything else, caught his attention. Victor ordered without looking at the menu, naming dishes by price rather than taste, as if the numbers themselves were the point. Elena repeated each item back to him clearly, her tone neutral, her posture relaxed. She didn't rush, didn't flatter, didn't pretend excitement. That absence of performance irritated him. He was used to people trying to impress him, or at least trying not to offend him. Her calm felt like a refusal to play the game. When she returned with his drink, Victor was already frowning. He lifted the glass, inspected it as though it might insult him, then set it down with a sharp tap. He told her the bubbles were wrong, the glass too warm, the timing unacceptable. Elena listened without interruption. When he finished, she nodded once and replaced the drink. No apology, no trembling explanation. Just action. Victor watched her walk away, unsettled by how little space he occupied in her mind. The food arrived quickly, plated perfectly, the kind of meal most people would photograph before touching. Victor cut into the steak, chewed once, then pushed the plate away with visible disgust. He called Elena back with a crooked finger, a gesture meant to reduce her to something obedient. She came, standing straight, eyes level with his. "This is wrong," he said. She asked how, genuinely, as if his opinion were data rather than a verdict. He struggled to answer, finally settling on vague insults about incompetence and wasted money. Elena examined the plate carefully, then looked at him again. She explained calmly that it matched his order exactly but offered to replace it if he wished. Her voice carried no challenge, only clarity. It was infuriating. Victor leaned back in his chair and asked if she knew who he was. The question usually ended conversations. People either froze or apologized when they heard his name. Elena simply confirmed it. When he asked if that frightened her, she paused briefly, then asked if it was supposed to. The question landed heavier than any insult. A few nearby diners pretended not to listen, failing badly. Victor's temper flared. He spoke of buying the restaurant, of firing her before she finished her shift, of ruining her chances in the city. Elena didn't raise her voice or shrink away. She told him that might be possible, but it wouldn't change who she was or what she'd done. The simplicity of her words stripped his threats of their drama. They sounded hollow in the open air. He accused her of arrogance. She responded by saying confidence didn't come from money, but from self-respect. The room went silent. Victor felt heat rise to his face, not from anger alone, but from recognition. He had spent his life buying obedience, mistaking it for worth. Now a waitress was holding up a mirror he hadn't asked for and couldn't break. He stood abruptly, laughter spilling out, sharp and uncertain. He threw a thick stack of bills onto the table, far more than the meal required, a final attempt to assert control. Elena gently slid most of it back toward him, leaving only a standard tip. She explained she hadn't done anything extraordinary, only her job. Victor stared at the money, then at her, and for the first time that evening, he had nothing to say. Victor remained standing for a moment longer, as if his body hadn't received the same message as his mind. The restaurant, which usually shrank around him, now felt strangely distant. Conversations had paused, forks hovered midair, and eyes followed him without the usual fear. He adjusted his coat, an automatic gesture meant to restore authority, but it didn't work the way it always had. He picked up the reduced tip slowly and placed it back on the table, this time with care rather than force. The gesture felt unfamiliar, almost intimate. Elena watched without expression, not victorious, not smug, simply present. That presence unsettled him more than any insult could have. For a brief second, Victor considered saying something sharp, something that would restore the balance he understood. A threat, a warning, a reminder of who he was. But the words refused to form. They felt childish now, stripped of their weight. He realized with sudden clarity that nothing he said would matter in this moment, not because he lacked power, but because power wasn't being measured here. He turned and walked toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last. No one rushed to open it for him this time. He reached out and did it himself. The rain outside had softened to a mist, blurring the city lights. As the door closed behind him, the room seemed to breathe again. Inside, the tension dissolved slowly, like ice melting in a glass. Someone laughed quietly. Another diner shook their head in disbelief. The manager hurried over to Elena, his face a mix of panic and awe. He asked if she understood what she had done, if she realized who that man was and what consequences might follow. Elena listened patiently, then told him she understood perfectly. She also said that if standing up for herself cost her the job, she would accept it. But the call never came. The restaurant wasn't bought. No complaints were filed. Victor Hale simply vanished from that space, as if it no longer existed on his map. Weeks passed, then months. The story remained, growing in the telling, spreading beyond the restaurant walls. People repeated it with a kind of quiet satisfaction, not because a millionaire had been embarrassed, but because fear had been interrupted. Elena continued working there, just another waitress to those who didn't know, a small legend to those who did. She didn't change her manner or seek attention. She poured drinks, took orders, and treated every customer the same way she had treated Victor Hale, with respect that didn't bend into submission. As for Victor, something lingered. In boardrooms and private dinners, he found himself noticing when people agreed too quickly, when smiles came too easily. For the first time, it bothered him. Somewhere in the back of his mind lived the memory of a quiet voice and steady eyes, and the unsettling truth they had revealed. That fear only ruled where people allowed it to. And that dignity, once claimed, could not be bought, threatened, or taken away.